My name is Gill Hicks and I'm a survivor of the London bombings which happened on July the 7th in 2005. On that morning I was just on my way to work, like most other people in the carriage with me. I was in the tube train in King's Cross in London, and strangely for me I was running late for work, something I never, ever did. And, you know, life coincided that I forgot my tube ticket, so I had to buy a new tube ticket, and the train didn't come, so I had to get on another train, and everything coincided that I ended up in the same carriage as a suicide bomber in King's Cross without me knowing. And we were seconds out from King's Cross, but I remember before the bomb going off, I remember desperately for wanting the driver to hurry up because I was running late for work, and there was a real sense that we were so packed in and more people were coming into the tube. And I remember thinking, please hurry up, close the doors so we can go, because I'm already really late for work. And they were my last real waking thoughts until suddenly, and as I said, it was just seconds out from King's Cross, and that's all it was. In the time that it takes to just draw a breath or click your fingers, my life and those around me changed forever. Everything just went completely black. And I remember thinking, am I dead? Have I just died? What happened? And I thought this was my own personal experience. I had no idea it was a bomb. I had no idea that there were so many people who had already died and who were suffering around me. I thought that my life had just ended. From what I remember, it was very interesting because I'd been standing when this whatever had just happened. I didn't know then it was a bomb blast had happened to me. And when I regained some consciousness, I was sitting in a bench seat. So somebody had put me, one of my fellow passengers had put me on a bench seat, and the panic that was in the tube, the carriage, had suddenly gone quiet. And from what I now know is that those who could get out did get out. And those of us who were left, which were those who were terribly injured, like myself, and those who had already lost their lives, were left in the carriage. And it was very quiet, except for us talking to each other, trying to keep each other alive, asking each other questions. What's your name? Where do you come from? Stay with us. And I remember looking down and seeing what remained of my legs. And I knew that both my legs would not be recovered, so I would lose both legs. But at the time, I think because an injury or injuries like that is so horrific, you can't quite imagine that you're going to lose your legs. So I remember thinking at the time, it will be fine, it will be fine. Once they rescue me, the doctors will fix me and I'll be fine. It just looks a lot worse than what it is. So I was trying to reassure myself. But at the time, I was losing a lot of blood and realised that I needed to act to save my own life whilst we were waiting for rescue. So I was lucky enough to still have a scarf on, and I took my scarf off and I made tourniquets around the tops, very tops of my legs in an attempt to try and stop some blood, and sat and waited because there was nothing else that we could do. And I remember I just stared at the watch I had on and stared and tried to focus on my watch only so I didn't have to think or look and see what had happened around me and the people around me. And it was about an hour before rescue could get to us. I learnt a lot about life and understood a lot about life when I was faced with my own death. And that being faced with my own death happened when I was in the carriage waiting in that hour for the rescue. And in that hour, I was confronted by what it meant to be no longer here, and what was important. What would I do? How would I use my life? And should I live? Should I survive? How do I best honour that life? And I knew instinctively in that moment, immediately after the bombing and waiting for rescue, that my life would never be the same again should I survive this. And indeed, the very moment that I could, I remember being asked what had happened when I was in hospital, and I was told then that it was a suicide bomber. And I just wanted to see his face. Who is this person? Who would do this? And I remember thinking, well, it must be some monster. And I was given a newspaper, and there was a picture in the newspaper of Jermaine Lindsay. And I looked at his picture, and I thought, wow, he's just a kid. He's a 19-year-old boy who just looks like a 19-year-old boy. And I didn't feel any hatred towards him. I didn't feel any bitterness. I looked at his face and I felt pity. I thought, how sad that you've chosen to end your life, to use your life, your small life, these tiny precious years that you've had, to cause such destruction. How sad. I think it makes a huge difference that the person that has done this to me is dead, that he's removed himself in both physically and emotionally for me, because it's taken away an opportunity to talk, to communicate, for him to even ask or want forgiveness. I don't know. So because he's no longer here, I don't have to think about him in any way, shape or form. I think about him more in a symbolic way of what he represents rather than him the person, which is very interesting because this is how he thought about me. So that morning on July 7, 2005, his name was Jermaine Lindsay. And I can only presume, as he presumed about me, that he set out that morning thinking of the people he was aiming to kill and to cause as much destruction as he could as his enemy. And that is what I find really interesting, because I wish I was asked. I wish that he'd taken the moments before he detonated his bomb to ask me, are you my enemy, Gill? Do you believe in this? Do you believe in that? Because I'm sure if we'd had the opportunity to talk, I'm sure he would have been quite surprised by my answer, and indeed by everybody's answer in that carriage, that I didn't think of anything as an us and a them. I didn't think of anything as walking around in my life thinking I was somebody's enemy or indeed deserved to die. But he took away the luxury of me ever being able to respond by presuming and detonating his bomb, and indeed maiming me and causing permanent injuries that I will live with for the rest of my life. I know that he didn't know me, so therefore he didn't do this deliberately to me. He didn't, again, set out that morning to say, I know, I'm going to take Gill Hicks's legs this morning. So therefore there's an anonymous sense that this wasn't personal, that I was just merely, again, symbolic of what he saw as the them to his us, or the enemy. And I guess in some ways, maybe that helps. Forgiveness for me, in this situation, hasn't really come into the equation. It hasn't been something that I've had to confront. It hasn't been something that I've had to think about, because for me, I see forgiveness as an exchange. And the exchange has been taken away because the person that's done this is dead. And I think also for me, forgiveness is something that is given if it's being asked. So I wouldn't want to again presume that Jermaine Lindsay would want to be forgiven. He may not want my forgiveness. Am I angry? Absolutely. It's not okay for someone to do this, and it's not okay for me to live a life without my legs. However, that anger I use as a positive motivator. So rather than to sit and to build a hatred and to have my life then taken even more than what Jermaine Lindsay has done, I feel strongly that it's about choice, and that it's about choosing. How do I want to react? How do I want to feel? I think choosing to not retaliate is courageous, because you're saying, I'm bigger than this. I'm bigger than where you're trying to take me down. I'm bigger than that, and I'm not going to meet you an eye for an eye. And I think that's very much the choices I've made. That hatred doesn't need to be met by more hatred. That destruction doesn't need to be met by more destruction. There are other ways out of that. So I think that's courageous, perhaps, to confront something and say, what do I do now? What is my choice? And how do I choose wisely?